Good day everyone. Good day Ma'am Rose Ador. My name is Junil R. Pueblos, your student in CA-200 Section F. Today, I'm going to report the Module 2. Lesson 2, Module 2. The History, Philosophy, and Objectives of Imprisonment and Development of Prisons. Sing Sing Prison, Airborne System, Pennsylvania System, 5 Development of Prisoners, Forms of Punishment, Age of Enlightenment. Personalities behind correctional institutions. Cesare Marquez of Vicaria Bonisai, Cesare Lombroso, William the Conqueror, Enrico Ferri, and Clifford Shaw. History of imprisonment. The original purpose of confining a person within a prison was not to punish them, but was a means of keeping the perpetrator of a crime detained until the actual punishment could be carried out. This was usually in the form of corporal punishment that was intended to cause the guilty person pain, such as being beaten with a whip, or capital punishment, which used a variety of methods to claim the lives of condemned individuals. By the 19th century, prisons were being built for the sole purpose of housing inmates. They were intended to deter people for committing crimes. People who were found guilty of various crimes would be sent to these penitentiaries and stripped of their personal freedoms. Inmates were often forced to do hard labor while they were incarcerated and to live in very harsh conditions. Before long, one of the goals of a prison sentence became the rehabilitation of inmates. Many people felt that the fear of being locked up would be enough to deter an inmate from ever committing another crime. But other theories held that policies should be introduced to help reform prisoners before they were set free. These policies include mental examinations, educational programs, and sometimes even far more drastic measures such as electroshock therapy. An opposing viewpoint to the rehabilitative effects of imprisonment claims that being incarcerated will actually cause people to become even more involved with a life of crime, because they become so enveloped in a crime society while living with the other inmates. Regardless of these conflicting opinions on rehabilitation of criminals, imprisonment continues to be one of the most common forms of punishment around the world. So we all know, guys, about Jeremy Bentham. We are all familiar about his name, Jeremy Bentham. So Jeremy Bentham was a philosopher and the author who strongly believed in a political system of utilitarianism. I'm so sorry. The idea that the best laws for society are those that benefit the largest number of people. He felt that every action any person took should be judged by how it aided or harmed the general public as a whole. So this is Jeremy Bentham. As you can see in the picture, Jeremy Bentham was a philosopher and an author who strongly believed in a political system of utilitarianism. Bentham is known for many accomplishments throughout his life. He produced a large body of writing that influenced and supported utilitarian theories, was a co-founder of the important Westminster Review publication, helped to establish the University of London, and devised a unique type of prison known as a panopticon. When Bentham passed away in 1832, he had his body preserved and displayed in a custom-designed cabinet he called the Otto Icon. He is considered by many to be the father of utilitarianism to this day. The death penalty. During the week of September 21, 2011, 3 people were executed in the United States. 2 of them were extensively covered in the media for different reasons. The Troy Davis case drew a lot of attention because Davis had been claiming for years he was innocent. His execution date had been rescheduled for 4 times due to court proceedings. However, he was executed on September 21. So guys, I think we are all familiar about this guy, about the execution of three person in September 2011. His case drew international attention because of the involvement of public figures and prominent groups, such as Jimmy Carter, Pope Benedict, and Amnesty International, who called for a review of his case. His case led to the reigniting of debates about the existence of capital punishment, namely the death penalty, in the United States. Capital punishment. Capital punishment describes the execution of any individual who has been found guilty of certain major crimes. The term stems from the Latin word capitalis, meaning regarding the head, and originally referred to beheading. While beheadings for many years involve a sharp axe or sword, the guillotine, an arguably more humane method, replaced them in 1972. As you can see in the picture, everyone, that one man executed on that picture. And please take write it down to your notebook or some trash paper. What is the Latin word of capitalis and the meaning of it? Despite the term's origin, capital punishment describes any form of criminal execution. Some commonly used execution methods over the years include firing squad, hangings, gas chambers, the electric chair, and the lethal injections. There have been many debates as to whether or not these methods are humane ways of ending a person's life. While current execution methods are effective, each one has been subject to failure or has taken longer than expected. So this is the picture of the, let's go back here. This is the picture of to how to execute a human or a guilty person. This one hanging, the lethal injections, electro chair or electrocution, gas chamber, and this one firing squad. So take note about this, guys. Take note. Form of detention or imprisonment. A. Arrest. Means the act of apprehending a person from the alleged commission of an offense or by the action of an authority. B. Detained person. Means any person deprived of personal liberty except as a result of conviction for an offense. C. Imprisoned person. Means any person deprived of personal liberty as a result of conviction for an offense. Take note about this, guys. Take note. D. Detention. Means the condition of detained person as defined above. E. Imprisonment. Means the condition of the imprisoned as defined above. F. The words a judicial or other authority. Means a judicial or other authority under the law status and tenure should afford the strongest possible guarantees of competence, impartiality, and independence. Philosophy of prison. Original goal of U.S. prisons was rehabilitation. We have alternative to corporal punishment. Justice model of imprisonment. Follows just desert philosophy. Focus on responsibility and punishment. Despite just desert with one as the punishment that one deserves. Deserve reward or punishment treat. Objectives of imprisonment. The purpose of a sentence of imprisonment or similar measures deprivate of a person's liberty as a primarily to protect society against crime and to reduce recidivism. Those purposes can be achieved only if the period of imprisonment is used to ensure, so far as possible, the reintegration of such persons into society upon release so that they can lead a law-abiding and self-supporting life. In the late 1980s, institutions for the confinement of convicts and detention of those awaiting for trial included a variety of national prisons and penal farms, as well as numerous small local jails and lockups. In general, the national prisons house more serious offenders, and those serving short-term sentences were held in local facilities. The prison system at the national level was supervised by the Bureau of Prisons of the Department of Justice or DOJ. The Bureau was responsible for the safekeeping of prisoners under rehabilitation through general and moral education and technical training in industry and agriculture. The Bureau also oversaw the operation of prison agro-industries and the production of food, commodities. In 1991, the newly formed of the Philippine National Police took over administrations of local jails. The government maintains 6 correctional institutions and penal farms. The nation's largest prison was the National Penitentiary at Muntinlupa, Rizal Province near Manila, which also operated the Manila City Jail. The penitentiary served as a central facility for those sentenced to life imprisonment or long-term incarceration. It was divided into 2 camps to separate those serving maximum and minimum penalties. The correctional institution for women was located in Metropolitan Manila. Combination prison and penal farms also were located in Zamboanga City and Palawan, Mindoro Occidental, and several Mindanao provinces. Prison conditions in the provinces were generally poor, and prison life was. Some prison inmates were eligible for parole and probation. Before serving their sentence, felons who were not changed with subversion of insurgency or probation. Probation were required to meet with their parole officers monthly to avoid any further offense and to comply with all other court-imposed conditions. After serving an established minimum sentence, certain prisoners could apply to their parole board of release. The board could also recommend pardon to the president of for I'm so sorry to the president for prisoners it believed to have reformed and were presented to menace to society. In 1991, crime is still was serious. A somewhat reduced threat to the general peace and security of society, and was aggravated by corruption in the police and court systems. The politicization of the military was seen as long-term problem and threat of military coup remained significant. The threat of a CPP-led takeover seemed to be receding as NPA guerrilla strength ebbed. The socio-economic roots of the revolutionary movement remained and promised to make the insurgency problems for some time to come. For some time to come, despite continuing threat posed by well-armed Filipino Muslim rebels. Although few feared a near-term resurgent Moro uprising, external security threats were not perceived. A series, a series of well-researched books published in the late 1980s added immensely to the available body of work on the Philippine Communist insurgency. William Chapman's Inside the Philippine Revolution offers unique insights on the revolutionary movement. Richard Kessler's Rebellion and Repression in the Philippines provide a thorough review of insurgency, especially its social and cultural roots. Greg Jones' Red Revolution combines discussions of CPP's historical development with revealing interview with communist leaders and first-hand reports of guerrilla commanders and political cadres in the field. Although predictably dogmatic, books by CPP founder by Jose Maria Sison, Philippine Society and Revolution, and the Philippine Revolution, present that theoretical underpinnings of the insurgency. The former appears under his nom de guerre, Amado Guerrero. Annual updates on the progress of the communist movement can be found in the Yearbook on International Communist Affairs. Comprehensive studies of Philippine military are few. Richard Kessler's Rebellion and Repression in the Philippines provides the most thorough examination of the armed forces of the Philippines and their strengths and weakness. The history of Philippine civil-military relations explored by two doctoral dissertations, Donald R. Berlin's Prelude to Martial Law, and Carolina Hernandez, The Extent of Civilian Control of the Military of the Philippines. More current information on the military role in politics can be found in the Far Eastern Economic Review, Asian Defense Journal, and Pacific Defense Reporter. Standard references on military capabilities include annual editions of the Military Balance, prepared by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and the United States Arms Control and Disarmament Agencies, World Military Expenditures and Arms Transfers, Jane's Infantry Weapons, Jane's Armor and Artillery, Jane's of the World's Aircraft, and Jane's Fighting Ships also are useful. The Military Human Rights Perform is reviewed annually by the Amnesty International Report and by the United States Department of State's Country Report on Human Rights Practices. Types of prison. Prisons are designed to house people who have broken the law and to remove them from free society. Inmates are locked away for a set period of time and have very limited freedoms during their incarceration. While every person serves the same basic purpose, there are many different types of prisons. The following are the types of prisons. So, these are the types of prison. Juvenile. An individual under the age is considered a juvenile. Anyone who is not of a legal age is never locked up in a general prison with adults. They are instead placed in a facility that is designed exclusively for juveniles. Minimum, medium, and high security. Minimum security prisons are usually reserved for white-collar criminals who have committed acts such as embezzlement, or fraud. Although these are serious crimes that are non-violent in nature and therefore the perpetrators are not considered to be a risk for violence. These perpetrators are sent to facilities that are offenders a dormitory type, living environment, fewer guides, and more personal freedoms. Medium security prisons are the standard facilities used to house most criminals. They feature cage-style housing, armed guards, and a much more regimented daily routine than minimum security. High security prisons are reserved for the most violent and dangerous offenders. These prisons include for more guards than both minimum and medium security and very little freedom. Each person confined to such a prison is considered to be a high-risk individual. The last one is psychiatric. Lawbreakers who are deemed to be mentally unfit are sent to psychiatric prison that are designed with resemblance to hospitals. Once there, the inmates or patients receive psychiatric help for mental disorders. As with any person that pursues methods of rehabilitations, psychiatric prisons are intended to try and help people as opposed to just confirming there as a means of punishment. Military. Every branch of military has its own prison facilities that are used specifically for military personnel who have broken the laws that affect national security or to house prisoners of war. The treatment of this prisoner has been a subject of much debate in recent times, and the definition of torture for enemy combatants has become a controversial, often and discussed topic. Federal prisons are under the jurisdiction of Federal Bureau of Prisons, or BOP, a subsidiary of the Department of Justice, or DOJ. If the crime the prisoners committed is federal, they will likely end up in federal prison. The exception is violent crimes, which are usually dealt with the state prisons. The federal prison system was started with the Three Prison Act of 1891. The law created the first three federal prisons of Leavenworth, Kansas, Atlanta, Georgia, and McNeil Island, Washington. State prisons are more numerous than federal prisons. Incarceration became the standard form of punishment in the U.S. States began creating their own similar but unique prison systems. Each state determines how its correctional system will function. The main difference beside offense between state and federal prison is the amount time served of a sentence. Federal prisons prohibited parole, so the amount of time served is significantly higher than the average time served in a state prison. Jail is a locally operated short-term facility, whereas a prison is a stable or federally operated long-term facility. Jails are mainly used for detaining inmates awaiting trial or sentencing. They can also house inmates who have been sentenced for less than a year. This will vary depending on the stable. Prisons or long-term facilities are used after sentencing, where felons and inmates are used for more than a year. These sentencing guidelines may vary by state. So this is the Sing Sing prison. We have the alcohol and substance abuse treatment program, anger management programs, educational vocational programs, family development programs, guidance and counseling services, library and law library services, recreational programs, religious programs, sex offender treatment, temporary release programs, trauma programs, transitional service programs, veteran services, and the last one is volunteer services and program. So this is the body of Sing Sing prison, and this is the image of the Sing Sing prison. In 1825, the state of New York struggled with the riddle: what do with the criminal? 2 years before, they tried to complete isolation from society from one another, from one another, from all stimulation. When they failed miserably, they switched to a model that involved prisoners doing hard labor together in silence. New York finished a 800 cell prison that would function in the style by 1828. They erected it by a quarry on Mount Pleasant, near the Hudson River town of Sing Sing. Sing Sing's name comes from the Indian priest Sing Sink. So take a note, everybody, about this Indian priest Sing. It means stone on stone. In 1901, 3 years after Edison introduced the electric chair at Sing Sing, the town changed its name to Ossining, so people wouldn't confuse it with a jail. Edison's dynamos ran on direct current. He invented the first electric chair to show how dangerously alternating current was, and 614 people eventually died in it. In 1828, prison was a stark gray stone box. No trace of ornamentation. The cells were feet high, 6.5 feet long, and 3 3/4 feet wide. They were equipped with a new device invented by an inmate. It was lever locking mechanism, a 150-foot long bar that locked up and unlocked 50 cells at once. Warden Laws took charge of Sing Sing in 1920. He appears for a while to have made the old hellhole into a model prison with a band, sports teams, educational programs, and more. It even had a little brick of area on the grounds. Low's book detailed his philosophy reform was clearly his first priority, and he viewed the death penalty as a useless deterrent. Today, the aviary is gone. Sing Sing is as grim as ever. We muddle hopelessly over the hard question. Is prison meant to reform, to punish, or just to keep criminal out of here for a reason? I doubt anyone knows. What I found most poignant about Sing Sing long history is that brings back a time when we honestly risked with that question. Lost ends with the idea that maybe not so maudlin after all. He says, we may never produce a world with men like gods, but we can at least implant a social consciousness that shall make of us in truth and in fact his brother keeper. Sing Sing. This full Sing Sing Correctional Facility, maximum security prison located in Osing, New York. In use since 1826, it is one of the oldest penal institutions in the United States. It also among the most well-known in the country, especially notable for its harsh condition in the 19th and 20th centuries. Originally known as Mount Pleasant Prison, it was constructed in the village of Sing Sing on the east bank of Hudson River, some 30 miles 48 kilometers north of the New York City. It was designed to provide additional prison space and to replace Newgate Prison. Construction was undertaken in 1825 by convict laborers under the supervision of Elam Lentz, warden of Audubon State Prison. He officially became head of the new prison when it opened in 1826. Though it was not complete until 1828, the initial facility had 800 cells. The prison population rose in the mid-19th century, resulting in more construction. The four-story complex was soon 6 stories, and the prison eventually housed more than 600 inmates. Because most of the early convicted criminals traveled by boat to Sing Sing, the phrase "up the river" came to mean going to prison. One of the notable visitors to the prison was Alexis de Tocqueville, author of Democracy in America. The French government sent him and Gustave de Beaumont to the United States in 1831 to gather information about the American penal system. The two men were amazed at the total subjugation under which prisoners work and the administrative power to the warden wielded at Sing Sing. Lentz resigned as a warden of Sing Sing in 1830 and returned to Audubon in 1838. He was asked to leave that year after the death of prisoner who punished severely for feigning illness. Despite this record, Sing Sing rehired Lentz in 1843. Whippings and floggings were commonplace punishments at Sing Sing. Frequently used was the cat o' nine tails, a cruel whipping contraption whose lashes were often tipped with metal or barbs. Its use was finally abolished by New York State legislature in 1848. In addition, while Lentz was warden, inmates were expected to refrain from making noise, which included taking, with an vent, on electric chair in 1891. Sing Sing became notorious for its executions, although the electric chairs was developed at neighboring Audubon. Almost all executions within the state were carried out at Sing Sing until 1963. The infamous death chair was later moved to Green Haven Prison. Sing Sing was also the site of reforms that affected the national penal system. Reformer Thomas Mott Osborne, who developed his penology theories while voluntarily incarcerated for a year at Audubon, served as Sing Sing's warden in 1914 to 15 and 16. But his immediate sweeping changes were assailed, and he resigned under intense political pressure. During his tenure, however, the first psychological work with inmates began. More reforms were instituted under Lewis Edward Laws, who served as warden from 1920 to 1941. He notably improved the living conditions within the prisons and allowed inmates to participate in sports. Osborne Thomas Moot. Thomas Moot Osborne, Right Warden, 1914, 15 and 16 of Sing Sing Prison, Library Congress, Washington, D.C., LCDIG GG Bain, 17937. Early reforms. William Penn, founder of the Pennsylvania colony, ushered in the colony's first significant penal reforms in 1680. Death was outlawed except for murder, and physical punishment was replaced by hard labor. Prisoners were kept in workhouses where they learned a trade as a part of their reformation. Free food and rudimentary health care was provided. The Pennsylvania prison system. In 1787, a group of Quakers formed a group that came to be the Pennsylvania Prison Society, and they lobbied for got significant reforms, a separate system, isolation, and solitude, where the prisoners would have time to reflect on their crimes and become reformed. Thus, the Pennsylvania prison system was born, and the focus went from retribution of rehabilitation, where efforts we made to change the prisoners into a honest citizen. Genesis of the Auburn prison system. Opening in 1817 and with final completions in 1823, the Auburn prison in Auburn, NY, or New York, was built with a new model in mind. It used a congregate system, which meant inmates work and ate together into isolation at night. The inmates engaged in hard labor and work on bridges, ditches, and carries and other difficult and tedious work. Floggings, though outlawed and a sentence, became the primary means of discipline. Auburn State Prison. In the early to middle 19th century, U.S. criminal justice was undergoing massive reform. State prisons, which had emerged out of earlier reform efforts, were becoming increasingly crowded, diseased, and dangerous. Consequently, the Auburn system was developed in New York at Auburn State Prison and Sing Sing Correctional Facility. Excuse me. The reformer believed that the penitentiary could serve as a model for family education. So sought a system that was rehabilitative than harshly punitive, prohibited from the taking at all times. Prisoners were confined in separate cells at night and then labored together during the day in workshops modeled on the industrial factory. The urban system eventually developed several key modifications. Slightly less concerned with the Quaker-inspired principle of nonviolence, Auburn embraced a more Puritan ethic of just recompense. Disagreement amongst these reformers about the future of American incarceration was often vociferous and combative. Indeed, the rivalry between them became one of the defining controversies of Jackson Iron period, through which Americans consisted the meaning of citizenship and humanity in the Republic. Smith 10. When Auburn was opened in 1818, the state commissioners on construction transferred power to a local board of inspectors appointed by the legislators. Recall the Gershom powers to describe the office in a brief account of the New York State Prison at Auburn, 1826. This prison is governed by the Board of Inspectors residing in the village, who are appointed every 2 years by the Governor and Senate. They have no compensation and are forbidden by law to make any contracts for the purchase of of sale of any articles with the agent of the prison. They appoint the agent and keeper, deputy keeper, and all subordinate officers, who are removable at their pleasure. They are authorized and required by several acts of the legislator to make and establish such rules and regulations from time to time for the government of the prison as they may deem necessarily, and which the necessary, sorry, yes, I'm sorry, and which the officers are bound to enforce and observe, all of whom are required to take an oath prescribed by law. But in 1846, the New York State Constitution established two inspector of the state prisons as an elective position. The amendment also abandoned the former system of separate government for each prison, explains the next document in the archive. This amendment held that three inspectors would hold office sequentially for 3 years, with an election occurring every year for one seat. Their rule was also to appoint wardens and keepers, supervising prison administration. Each one took special responsibility over one of the existing state prisons, Eoborn, Sing Sing, and Clinton. They were required to oversee operations under assigned prisons for 1 week every month and make joint visits to each prisoners for 4 times a year. In the years intervening, he stint as the president of the Board of Inspectors at Sing Sing and his constitutional amendment. John W. Edmonds founded the Prison Association of New York in 1844. The organization was formed to advocate for criminal defendants and people in prison, improve penal discipline and administration, as well as help with post-release reintegration in the latter part of the century. They expanded these reformist efforts dramatically to create the National Prison Association, now the American Prison Association, in 1870, and then in the International Prison Congress 2 years later. They also lobbied for the separation of convicted youth and adults in 1864 to 1874, helped institute the states from probation and parole system. Century 1875 opposed corporal punishment in 1844 to 1864 and fought against the exploitation of convict labor. It remains the only private body in New York with the power to conduct on-site examinations of its state correctional facilities, reporting observations and recommendations to the government and public. The following two documents is this exhibit reveals some of the tensions between the Prison Association of New York and the reorganized inspectors of state prisons. Following these controversies, the latter was abolished in 1876 by another constitutional amendment which instituted the superintendent of state prisoner instead. This position was once appointed by the New York governor and confirmed by the Senate, a corrective to the partisan behavior of previously elected inspectors. The superintendent's 5-year term also allayed concerns about the fluctuating policies of 3 inspectors. This mid-century debates between the independent operating prison association and publicly elected inspectors of state prisons reveal important lessons about the divisions of power and interest in prison management. Constructed in 1817, Eoborn Prison, currently known as Eoborn Correctional Facility, was the second state prison in New York. The volumes in this collection include information on inmates who were received in the prison between years 1816 and 1942. Several different types of records including register of male inmates, reserve discharge, registers of female inmates, reserve discharge, register of sentences, registers of female inmates and foreign-born inmates, register of the commutations of male and female inmates are included in this collection. Early registers recorded the inmate's name, county tried in crime, dates of conviction and admission, sentence. Allies and county received from personal details may include age, place of birth, marital and family status, residence, physical description, and identifying markings, scar status, and etc. Literacy, language spoken, religious habits, and occupations were also noted. Later years added even more information, with more detailed description and incarceration history in 1908, and after 1914, forms were expanded to include details such as parents, nativity, immigration, military service, and prisoners. I'm so sorry. And more. Pennsylvania system. Pennsylvania system, penal method based on the principle that solitary confinement fosters penitence and encourages reformation. The idea was advocated by the Philadelphia Society for alleviating the miseries of public prisons, where most active members were Quakers. In 1829, the Eastern State Penitentiary on Cherry Hill in Philadelphia applied this so-called separate philosophy. Prisoners were kept in solitary confinement in cells 16 feet high, nearly 12 feet long, and 7.5 feet wide, 4.9 by 3.7 by 2.3 meters, an exercise yard, completely enclosed to prevent among prisoners, was attached to each cell. Prisoners saw no one except institution officer and occasional visitors. Solitary penitence, however, was soon modified to include the performance of work such as showmaking or weaving. The Pennsylvania system spread until it predominated in European prisons. Critics in the United States argued that it was too costly and had serious effects on the minds of the prisoners. The Pennsylvania system was superseded in the United States by the Airborne system. Commissioned by the Pennsylvania General Assembly to revise the state's criminal code, Messrs. King and Wharton of Philadelphia and Judge Schiller in Pittsburgh visited Airborne State Prison in 1826. They follow up letters seeking further information, along with similar requests from authorities in Ohio and New York Governor DeWitt Clinton himself, prompted Judicial Powers as the agent and keeper to issue this report. It outlines the main principle and practice of this institution in pamphlet form, suitable for general circulation, as well as to train newly appointed prison officers. Their letters are also included, revealing the questions that motivated prison reformers across the U.S. Northeast: disciplinary methods, architectural design, general health and cleanliness, productivity and style of inmate labor, operating costs, recidivism rates, and convict population demographics. Following this, Powers gives an account of the construction, management, and discipline of Airborne Prison, a compendium of criminal law, an abstract of the constructs first made with local manufacturers, a report on the trial of an officer for whipping a convict, as well as a plan of the prison. Power was a zealous advocate of the Airborne system, and his defense of it eliminates key ideological differences with the Pennsylvania reformers. Be especially attentive to the rhetoric of subtle ridicule and self-aggrandizement in his report, a tone which is echoed by the Pennsylvania system. I'm so sorry everyone about my PowerPoint. their memorandum of late visit to the Eoborn system later in this collection. Pennsylvania Eastern Penitentiary 1829 was intended to keep convicts separate even as they work in order to prevent any earthly contamination or distraction that might impede their repentance. Hence the term of penitentiary located on Cherry Hill on the outskirts of Philadelphia. Eastern representative one of the most imposing and expensive architectural achievements in the United States of to date, and it's contained innovations such as running water and flush toilets in all the cells. Although Beaumont and Tocqueville found it incontestable that its perfect isolation secures the prisoner from all fatal contamination, they favored the more cost-effective Eoborn plan, which seemed more likely than able states to profit from convict labor. Francis Labor, the Prussian immigrant scholar, was translated Beaumont and Tocqueville's work into English, hailed America's new penitentiary system as monuments of a charitable disposition of the honest members of society toward their fallen and unfortunate brethren. Labor coined the term penology to describe that the branch of criminal science which occupies itself with the punishment of the criminal, not with the definition of crime, the subject of accountability and the proving of the crime, which belongs to criminal law and penal process. Another prominent foreign visitor to Eastern Penitentiary was much more critical of the uncompromising solitary confinement approach. After touring the institution in 1842, Charles Dickens, the English novelist, concluded in his American Notes in 1842 that the Pennsylvania, tampering with the mysteries of the brain, to be immeasurably worse than any torture of the body. I'm sorry about my PowerPoint, Ma'am Jill Rose Ador. I'm sorry, ma'am. Please proceed to the next slide, ma'am. They also receive access to a variety of books and other reading material, some of which was in other languages on the Sabbath. Inmates could open a hole in their cell door and listen to religious services given in the prison hallways. To accommodate these activities and ensure proper health, these cells were quite larger than those at Eoborn. Additionally, each cell had access to small, private yard in which an inmate could exercise or even cultivate a garden. This long-term solitary confinement or separate confinement, as supporters called it, was the central feature of the Pennsylvania system. Who are the Quakers? Quakers believe that there is something of God in everybody and that each human being is of unique worth. This is why Quakers value all the people all equally and oppose anything that may harm or threaten them. Quakers seek religious truth in inner experience and place great reliance on conscience as the basis of morality. The Quakers have been influential in the history of reform. Quakers have been a significant part of the movements of the abolition of slavery to promote equal rights and peace. They have also promoted education and the humane treatment of prisoners and the mentally ill through the founding or reforming of various institutions. The difference between Pennsylvania and Eoborn system. So, Pennsylvania system is separate and silent, solitary confinement, repentance, used as at Western and Eastern state penitentiaries, cause mental problems, while Eoborn system is concrete great and silence, work in groups, repentance and hard labor, used at Auburn and other New York prisons, or Sing Sing, adopted by other states, fewer mental problems, good work habits, and discipline. The different types of criminal punishment. Number one is incapacitation. Number two is deterrence. Number three is retribution. Number four is rehabilitation. And the last one is restoration. Incapacitation. Incapacitation seeks to prevent future crime by physically moving criminals away from society. This punishment can be traced to ancient times. Terence Smith and Hong Lu write in Punishment, a comparative historical perspective. Banishment was a common penalty in antiquity. Later, it was common for colonizing European countries to ship convicts and unserved rebels overseas. In modern times, house arrest, incarceration, and death penalty are all forms of incapacitation. Proponents of the incapacitation theory, punishment advocate that the offenders should be prevented from committing further crimes either by their temporary or permanent removal from society or by some other method that restricts their physical ability to reoffend in some other way. Incarceration is the most common method of incapacitating offenders. However, other more severe forms such as capital punishment are also used. The overall aim of incapacitation is to prevent the most dangerous or prolific offenders from reoffending in the community. Types of incapacitation. Selective incapacitation. The selective incapacitation philosophy incarcerated individuals for longer periods of time than others. Thus, it removes the individual ability to commit crimes in society for greater periods of time in the future than others. Collective incapacitation. The incarceration of large groups of individuals remove their ability to commit crimes for a set amount of time in the future. Deterrence. The goal of deterrence is to persuade citizens and the possible offenders and re-offenders to conform to the rules of law. Smith and Lu explain that four types of deterrence are generally recognized. Number one, specific deterrence. Analyze how effective punishment is on an individual future behavior. Number two, general deterrence. Seeks to understand how individual punishment can deter others from committing crimes. Marginal deterrence seeks to reconcile how effective different types of punishment are as either specific or general deterrence. The last one is partial deterrence. Refers to situation in which the threat of penalty has some deterrent value even when someone engages in legal behavior. For example, A. Criminal simply robbing a victim instead of also causing physical harm. The effectiveness of deterrence as a criminal punishment is difficult to assess because people may follow the law for other reasons that may be challenging to track, such as religious or more beliefs, physical incapacitation, or lack of opportunity. Five things about deterrence. Number one, the certainty of being caught is vastly more powerful deterrent than the punishment. Research show clearly that the chance of being caught in a vastly more effective deterrent than even draconian punishment. Number two, sending an individual convicted of a crime to prison isn't a very effective way to deter crime. Prisons are good for punishing criminals and keeping them off the streets, but prison sentences, particularly long sentences, are unlikely to deter future crime. Prisons actually may have the opposite effect. Inmates learn more effective crime strategies from each other, and time spent in prison may desensitize many to the threat of future imprisonment. Number 3, police deter crime by increasing the perception that criminals will be caught unpunished. The police deter crime when they do things that strengthen a criminal's perception of the certainty of being caught. Strategies that use the police as sentinels, such as hot sports policing, are particularly effective. A criminal's behavior is more likely to be influenced by seeing a police officer with handcuffs and a radio than a new law increasing penalties. Number 4, increasing the severity of punishment does little deter crime. Laws and policies designed to deter crime by focusing mainly on increasing the severity of punishment are ineffective, partly because criminals know little about the sanction for specific crimes. More severe punishment do not chasten individuals convicted of crimes, and prison may exacerbate recidivism. Number 5, there is no proof that the death penalty deter criminals. According to the National Academy of Sciences, research on the deterrent effect of capital punishment is uninformative about whether capital punishment increases, decreases, or has no effect of homicide rates. Retribution. As one of the oldest forms of punishment, retribution has roots in the Judeo-Christian tradition of justice. In her book, Criminal Law, Lisa M. Storm explains that retribution prevents crime by giving victims of society a certain sense or satisfaction that a defendant has been punished appropriately, reinforcing the belief that the criminal justice system is working effectively. Modern examples of retribution include the widespread practices of imposing fines, as well as enforcing mandatory sentencing policies for certain offenses under the law. As an effective punishment, retribution had been criticized as being overly rigid, unlimited, and in its capacity to change societal behavior. However, it remains popular. Retribution is probably the oldest jurisdiction of punishment and can be found in the theories offered by Kant and Hegel, Brooks 2001. It is the fact that individual has committed a wrongful act that justifies punishment, and the punishment should be proportional to the wrong committed. Its underlying premise has been summarized by the philosopher Kurt Bayer as follows: all those convicted of wrongdoing or crime deserve punishment. Only those convicted of a wrongdoing or crime deserve punishment. The severity of the punishment should not be less than gravity of the crime. The severity of punishment should be greater than the gravity of the crime. And this is the rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is a common prison policy in America up until the 1970s. Rehabilitation focuses on helping criminals and prisoners overcome the barriers that led them to committing criminal acts. This includes developing occupational skills as well as resolving psychological issues such as drug addiction and aggression. Explained the American Psychological Association, or APA, consider the opposite of retribution. The ultimate purpose of rehabilitation is to transition offenders back into society. The APA reports that examining massive data, individualized approaches to crime, complemented with community-based approaches, can prove effective in reducing offender recidivism. A radically different approach to criminal punishment. The goal of restoration is for the offender to make direct amends to both the victim and the community in which the crime was committed. Although a relatively new practice in modern times, the concept of restorative justice can be found in the early legal system of Western Europe, ancient review justice, and pre-colonial African societies. During the process of restoration, victims initiate a process in which both they and the offender meet the shared feelings and concerns. The dialogue offers victims the opportunity to be heard and the offender to make amends and receive forgiveness. Restorative justice is often used in crimes involving youth offenders. Age of Enlightenment. The Age of Enlightenment, also known as the Enlightenment, was a philosophical movement that dominated the world of ideas in Europe in the 18th century, centered on the idea that reason is a primary source of authority and legitimacy. This movement advocates such ideals as liberty, progress, tolerance, fraternity, constitutional government, and separation of church and state. The Enlightenment was marked by an emphasis on a scientific method and reductionism, along the increased questioning of religious orthodoxy. The core ideas advocated by modern democracies, including the civil society, human civil rights, and separations of powers, are the products of the Enlightenment. Furthermore, the sciences and the academic disciplines, including social sciences and the humanities, as we know them today, based on empirical methods, are also rooted in the Age of Enlightenment. Also, these developments, which followed and partly overlapped with European exploration and colonization of the Americas and intensification in the exploration and colonization Americas of the European presence in Asia and Africa, make the Enlightenment a starting point of what some historians define as the European moment in world history, the long period of often tragic European domination over the rest of the world. National varieties. The Enlightenment took hold in most European countries, often with a specific local emphasis. For example, in France, it became associated with anti-government and anti-church radicalism, while in Germany it reached deep into the middle classes and took spiritualistic and nationalistic tone without threatening governments or established churches. Government responses varied widely. In France, the government was hostile and Enlightenment thinkers fought against the censorship, sometimes being imprisoned or hounded into exile. The British government largely ignored the Enlightenment leaders in England and Scotland. The Scottish Enlightenment, with its mostly liberal, Calvinist and Newtonian focus, played a major role in the further development of the next slide. I'm so sorry about my slide, Ma'am Jill Rose. I'm so sorry, ma'am. In Italy, the significant reduction in the church power led to a period of great thought and invention, including scientific discoveries. In Russia, the government became actively encouraged the proliferation of arts and sciences in the middle 18th century. This era produced the first Russian university, library, theater, public museum, and independent press. Several Americans, especially Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, played a major role in bringing Enlightenment ideas to the New World and in influencing British and French thinkers. The cultural exchange during the Age of Enlightenment ran into both directions across the Atlantic. In the development of the ideas of natural freedom, Europeans and American thinkers drew from American Indian cultural practices and beliefs. Major Enlightenment ideas. In the middle 18th century, Europe witnessed an explosion of philosophic and scientific activity that challenged traditional doctrines and dogmas. The philosophic movement was led by Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who argued for a society based upon reason rather than faith and Catholic doctrine, for a new civil order based on a natural law, and for science based on experiments and observation. The political philosopher Montesquieu introduced that idea of separation of powers in government, a concept which enthusiastically adopted by the authors of the United States Constitutions. There were two distinct lines of Enlightenment thought. The radical Enlightenment, inspired by the philosophy of Spinoza, advocated democracy, individual liberty, freedom of expression, and eradication of religious authority. A second, more moderate variety, supported by René Descartes, John Locke, Christian Wolff, Isaac Newton, and others, sought a combination between reform and the traditional system of power and faith. Impact. The ideas of the Enlightenment played a major role in inspiring the French Revolution, which began in 1789 and emphasized the rights of common men as opposed to exclusive rights of elites. As such, they laid the foundation of modern, rational democratic societies. However, historians of race, gender, and class note the Enlightenment ideals were not originally envisioned as universal in the today's sense of the word. Although they did eventually inspire the struggles for rights of people of color, women, or the working masses, most Enlightenment thinkers did not advocate equally for all regardless of race, gender, or class, but rather insisted that rights and freedoms were the heredity of power and rights was common, pre-Enlightenment assumptions. This perspective directly attacked the traditionally explosive position of the European aristocracy, but was still largely focused on expanding the rights of white males of a particular social standing. And this is Caesar Beccaria. So we all know, guys, about Caesar Beccaria. Uh, we all familiar about his name. Who was Cesare Beccaria? Cesare Beccaria was a criminologist and economist. In the early 1760s, Beccaria helped from a society called the Academy of Feasts, dedicated to economic, political, and administrative reform. In 1764, he published his famous and influential criminology essay on crimes and punishments. In 1768, he started a career in economics, which lasted until his death. So once again, ma'am, good day. I am Junior Pueblos, your student in CA-200 Section F. This is my last slide, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am, and God bless.